Welcome to American Family, where the people who are supposed to love you the most are sometimes the ones you should fear. If a story of betrayal, loyalty, and one old man's final reckoning is what you came for, settle in. This one will stay with you. Stay until the end. Because by the time you understand what my children truly wanted, you will never look at the word family the same way again. The night my eldest son explained to the others why I had to die, he counted it out on his fingers like a grocery list. He did not know I was standing at the top of the cellar stairs, holding my dead wife's rosary in my fist. Everyone says a father should forgive his children anything. Everyone is wrong. There are 3 words my son said in that cellar that I will never forgive. And they were not "kill the old man." They were something far worse and far quieter. And by the time you understand what they were, you will understand why I did what I did next. But I am getting ahead of myself. To understand how a father comes to stand in the dark, listening to his own children plan his death, you have to understand who I was before. And you have to understand how badly I wanted to stop being him. My name is Salvatore Marchetti. I am 68 years old. For 40 of those years, men in this city crossed the street rather than pass too close to me. I will not pretend to you that I was a good man. I built things in the dark that I will answer for someday. And I buried more than one secret in the cold ground beneath Chicago. But I want you to know that I walked away from all of it. Every dollar I own today is clean. Every name on every door I built is honest. I made certain of that. Because of her, Rosa, my wife. The only person on this earth who ever saw the man underneath the name. She died 11 months ago. They told me it was her heart, that it simply stopped one night while she slept, that there was no pain. I believed them, because believing them was the only way I could keep breathing. I buried her on a gray morning with the whole city watching. And then I came home to a house so quiet I could hear the clocks. I learned that there is a particular silence that fills a house after a long marriage ends. It is not empty. It is full of all the small sounds that are missing. The coffee she is not pouring. The hymn she is not humming. The footsteps that do not come for 7 months. I lived in that silence alone. My 3 grown children did not visit. They called on holidays, briefly, the way you call a man you are waiting to inherit from. I told myself they were busy. I told myself a great many things. Then, in November, I went to see the doctor. I had been forgetting things. Small things at first. A name here, an appointment there. Then larger things. I would find myself in a room with no memory of why I had walked into it. The doctor ran his tests, and he sat me down with the careful face that men in his profession wear when the news is bad. And he told me that my mind was beginning to fail, that it would only grow worse, that I should put my affairs in order while I still could, and tell my family. So I told my family. I called my eldest son, Vincent, first. I told him what the doctor had said, plainly, the way I have always spoken. There was a pause on the line. And then my son, who had not set foot in my house in 7 months, said, "I'll come home tonight, Papa. I'll take care of everything." His voice was warm, too warm. It was the voice of a man who had just been handed something he wanted and was trying very hard to sound sorry about it. I told myself I was imagining it. I called my daughter, Gianna, next. She is a lawyer, sharp as a winter morning, and she did not waste time on tears. Don't sign anything. Papa, she said, don't talk to anyone about money until I get there. I mean it. Anyone. I had told her I was losing my mind, and her very first thought, was paperwork. And then I called my youngest, Nico, the gambler, the soft one, the boy I had long ago given up on. He listened, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. Then, very quietly, in a voice I did not recognize, he said, I'm sorry, Papa. I'm so sorry. At the time I thought it was grief. I know now it was guilt. 3 children, 3 phone calls. And by the time I set down the telephone that night, all 3 of them were coming home. After 7 months of silence, within a single day of learning their father was dying, I sat alone in Rosa's kitchen as the cold November dark pressed against the windows. And I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Not fear, exactly. I had buried fear decades ago. It was the old instinct, the one that had kept me alive through 40 years of men who smiled while they reached for the knife. The instinct that whispers when something is wrong, long before the mind can prove it. My children were coming home to take care of me. That is what they said. That is what a family does. But I had spent my whole life learning to tell the difference between a hand extended to help and a hand extended to take. And as I sat there in my dead wife's kitchen, listening to those 3 warm voices echo in my memory, the cold in my chest told me a thing I was not yet ready to believe. Within a single night, I would learn exactly how right that cold had been. They came faster than grief should allow. I had expected a day, perhaps 2, the polite delay of busy people rearranging their lives. Instead, before the sun had fully risen the next morning, the first car pulled into my drive. It was a black German sedan, the kind that costs more than most men earn in a year, and it belonged to my eldest. Vince stepped out of it wearing a charcoal suit and an expression he had clearly practiced in the mirror, a careful arrangement of concern and tenderness that did not quite reach his eyes. He crossed the gravel with his arms already open. Papa, he said, and he held me, and I smelled expensive cologne and underneath it something sharper, something I recognized from a lifetime of reading men. It was anticipation, the scent of a man who believes he is about to win. By mid-morning, my daughter arrived. Gianna swept into the house with the brisk authority of a woman who bills $350 an hour for her time. She is a lawyer, my Gianna, and a very good one, which is to say she has learned to make cruelty sound reasonable and patience sound like generosity. She kissed my cheek. She told me I looked thinner. She set a leather bag down on the kitchen counter and began, almost immediately, to open drawers, as if she were taking inventory of a house she already considered hers. Nico came last, in the early evening, the way he had always done everything in his life, a half step behind the others. My youngest has shoulders that hunch, as though he is forever bracing for a blow, and eyes that move toward the exits even in rooms where no danger lives. He hugged me too tightly and held on a beat too long. I am here. Papa, he whispered. Whatever you need. And of the 3 of them, he was the only one whose voice carried something that sounded almost like real pain, though I was too tired that night to understand why. For the days that followed, they performed for me. There is no other word that fits. Vince rose early each morning and brought me coffee, black with a single sugar, exactly the way I take it. A detail that should have warmed me but instead made my skin crawl, because my son had not made me a cup of coffee in more than a decade. Gianna filled the kitchen with food she did not eat and arranged flowers in a vase that Rosa had loved. Nico sat beside me in the evenings and asked, in his quiet way, whether I was comfortable, whether I needed a blanket, whether the television was too loud. It was kindness. It was attention. And it was every single gesture of it. Completely false. I knew this the way a fisherman knows a storm by the smell of the air. I had spent 40 years watching men perform loyalty they did not feel, and I had learned that the performance always has a tell. With my children, the tell was in their eyes. They did not look at me. They looked at the house. I watched Vince's gaze travel across the oil paintings in the study, lingering, measuring. I watched Gianna's fingers trail along the carved edge of the dining table, the one Rosa and I had bought in our first year of marriage. I watched Nico, when he thought no one could see, lift his phone and quietly photograph the room, the furniture, the silver, capturing every angle as though preparing a catalog for an estate sale that had not yet been announced. They were appraising me, not my health, not my heart, but my holdings. They moved through my home like assessors through a property in foreclosure, and the dying man at the center of it all was nothing more than an obstacle standing between them and the inheritance they had already, in their minds, divided. I had built my entire fortune by understanding one simple truth. Nothing reveals a person's nature faster than placing a sufficiently large number in front of them and watching what they do with their face. I had used that truth against rivals and partners and enemies for 4 decades. I had simply never thought I would need to use it against my own blood. And yet here they were. 3 grown children I had carried as infants, whose tiny weight I could still feel against my chest if I closed my eyes. And they had become strangers, wearing the faces of people I loved. There is a particular kind of cold that settles into a father when he stops recognizing his own children. It is worse than fear. Fear at least believes in a future. This was something closer to mourning. The grief of burying someone who is still standing in the room, still smiling at you, still calling you Papa. On the 4th evening, as I sat in my chair pretending to read, I watched the 3 of them gather near the kitchen, their heads bent close together. Their voices dropped to the low murmur of people who have forgotten that old men are not deaf, only quiet. And I understood, with the calm certainty that had once made other men afraid of me, that the performance I was witnessing had not been improvised. It was rehearsed, somewhere before they ever arrived at my door. My children had sat together and agreed upon their parts. They had decided who would bring the coffee and who would arrange the flowers and who would play the grieving son. They had written a script titled How to Care for a Dying Father, and they were reading it to me line by line. I set down my book. I said nothing. A man who reveals what he knows too early surrenders the only advantage he has left. But I made a quiet promise to myself in that moment, sitting in the chair Rosa used to scold me for falling asleep in. I would find out what they had written for my ending, and I would discover, before they did, exactly how the story was meant to close. The mask did not slip on its own. I helped it fall. On the 5th night, over a dinner that Gianna had arranged, and none of us truly ate, I decided to place my number on the table and watch their faces, exactly as I had done to harder men in colder rooms many years ago. We were seated around the long table, the candles burning low, the conversation circling politely around my health, the way vultures circle something not yet dead. And it was Vince, of course, who finally reached for the thing they all wanted. He set down his fork. He spoke in the casual tone of a man asking about the weather. "Papa," he said, "have you given any thought to the estate? We only want to help you plan properly, while everything is still clear." From the far end of the table, Gianna joined him before I had even drawn breath to answer. "We do not want you stressed about paperwork," she said, her voice smooth as oil on water. "You should be focusing on your health." And then Nico, too quietly, almost to himself, asked whether I still kept the important documents in the house, or whether they were somewhere safer. I looked at the three of them in the candlelight. My children, the people I had bled the world dry to protect. And I told them the truth, slowly, watching every muscle in their faces as I spoke. I said, "I have not arranged any of it yet. There is no will. There is no trust. Nothing has been signed." The change was immediate, and it was beautiful in the way that only honesty under pressure can be. Vince's careful smile froze on his mouth like ice forming over a pond. Gianna's hand stopped halfway to her wine glass and hung there, suspended, forgotten. Nico's shoulders went rigid, and the color drained from all three faces in a single synchronized moment, as though someone had reached behind them and pulled a plug, letting every drop of warmth run out at once, for perhaps 2 seconds. The masks were gone entirely, and I saw what lived beneath them. Not grief, not love, something cold and impatient and calculating. The expression of people who have just learned that the thing standing between them and a fortune is more stubborn than they had planned for. I had seen that exact look on the faces of men across negotiating tables. Men who had just realized a deal was slipping away from them. I had never expected to see it worn by my own daughter at my own dinner table. Vince recovered first. He always did. Of course. "Papa," he said, smoothing his voice back into shape. "There is no rush. We only want to help when you are ready." But it was too late. The thing beneath the mask had shown itself, and a man cannot unsee what he has finally been permitted to see. They finished the meal with talk of nothing, of weather and old neighbors and childhood memories that may or may not have happened. And one by one they retired upstairs with soft assurances of how glad they were to be home. I sat alone in the dining room long after the candles had guttered out. The house settled around me, the old beams ticking as they cooled. And I thought about Rosa, and I thought about how she would have known, long before I did, what our children had become. She had always seen people more clearly than I had. I saw threats. She saw souls. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small and terrible suspicion began to take shape. A suspicion I was not yet ready to name. I do not know what hour it was when I woke. The house was black and silent in the way that only a house in the deep middle of the night can be. I had fallen asleep in my chair again, the way I always did. And something had pulled me up out of that sleep. Some old instinct that had kept me breathing through decades when other men did not survive the night. I sat very still, and I listened. At first, there was nothing. Only the wind against the windows and the distant hum of the city that never fully sleeps. And then I heard it. Voices, low, urgent, careful. The particular hush that people use only when they are saying things they know are wrong. They were not coming from the bedrooms upstairs. They were rising, faint and muffled, from somewhere below me, from beneath the floor of the house itself, the cellar, the old wine cellar that Rosa and I had built into the foundation, where the air stays cool and the stone holds sound the way cupped hands hold water. Someone was down there in the dark, in the small hours of the morning, speaking in whispers they believed no one could hear. I rose from my chair without a sound. 40 years of moving quietly through dangerous rooms do not leave a man, no matter how old he becomes. My heart was steady. My hands did not shake. I crossed the dark hall toward the cellar door, placing each foot the way I had once been taught. Heel light, weight slow. And with every step, those whispering voices grew clearer, sharper, more impossible to mistake. One of them was Vince. I would know my eldest son's voice anywhere, even stripped of its performance, even reduced to a hiss in the dark. And the tone of it was not the tone of a grieving son keeping a vigil for his dying father. It was the tone of a man conducting business, cold, practical, planning. I stopped at the top of the cellar stairs, one hand resting on the cool iron of the railing. And I did not go down. I did not announce myself. I simply stood in the darkness above them and I listened, the way I had listened to enemies my entire life. And what I heard rising out of that cellar in the dead of night would tell me, at last and beyond any doubt, exactly what my children had come home to do. A man learns more in 5 minutes of eavesdropping than in 5 years of being lied to. I had built half my empire on that single principle, and now, standing in the dark at the top of my own cellar stairs, I prepared to use it against the children I had made. The cool air rose around my ankles, carrying their voices up to me through the stone, and I closed my eyes the way I always had when I wanted to hear not just the words a man spoke, but the truth hiding underneath them. Vince was speaking. "We need to move faster," he said. "The old man is sharper than he looks." I caught him watching me at dinner. Really watching. The way he used to watch people he did not trust. I heard Gianna answer. Her voice that flat professional calm she used in courtrooms. The voice that had never once cracked in front of a judge. "Then we stop waiting for him to cooperate," she said. "We file for emergency guardianship. We get a physician to certify cognitive decline, and once the court appoints a guardian, it does not matter what he wants or does not want. We control everything. The trust, the properties, all of it." I stood very still. Emergency guardianship. I knew those words. I had spent the last decade of my life among lawyers and bankers, building the clean machinery of a legitimate fortune, and I understood exactly what my daughter was describing. They did not merely intend to wait for me to die. They intended to have me declared incompetent, to strip me of my own name and my own choices while I still drew breath, to lock me away somewhere quiet and convenient and take apart everything Rosa and I had built across 35 years of marriage. And they believed I was too old and too sick to notice. It takes a great deal to wound a man who has been shot at, betrayed, and buried alive by his own profession. I thought I had felt every kind of pain a heart could hold. I was wrong. There is a specific agony reserved only for a father who hears his children planning his erasure in the cellar he built with his own hands. And it is unlike anything an enemy can do to you. An enemy is supposed to want you gone. Your blood is supposed to want you to live, but it was Vince who delivered the blow that truly stopped my heart. I heard him laugh, low and quiet, the laugh of a man savoring something. He said, "You know what the real problem is. As long as he is breathing, none of it is ours. Not really. The territory, the connections, the respect the name still carries on these streets, all of it sits with him, frozen, useless, because he chose to walk away and play the saint. Power is not real until the old man is in the ground. That is the truth. None of you want to say out loud, power is not real until the old man is in the ground." My own son, the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle on the gravel of that very drive, the boy who had fallen asleep on my chest 1,000 nights while Rosa sang to him in the language of her grandmother. He stood beneath me in the dark and spoke of putting his father in the ground the way another man might speak of clearing a fallen tree from a road. I gripped the iron railing until the cold of it bit into my palm, and I forced myself to breathe, slow and silent, because the instinct that had kept me alive for 40 years was screaming at me to stay still, to stay quiet, to learn everything before I revealed that I knew anything at all. A man who shows his wound gives his enemy a place to push. So I did not move. I let the agony sit in my chest like a stone, and I kept listening. And then I heard something that turned the agony into something else entirely, something colder, something that reached back across decades and put ice into my blood. Gianna spoke again, lower now, more cautious, as though even she understood that what she was about to say crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She said, "If we are really doing this, if we are taking back the old territory the way you keep talking about, then we cannot do it alone. We do not have the men. We do not have the reach. You said you found someone willing to help us. Who is it?" "Vince." "Who have you been meeting with?" There was a pause. In that pause, I knew some part of me, the old part, the part that had survived 3 wars between families and the part that had never truly stopped being a wolf, already knew the answer before my son gave it. And when Vince spoke the name into the dark of my cellar, it was as though the foundation of my house cracked open beneath me. He said it quietly, almost proudly. He said, "The Donovans, the Donovans." I had to press my free hand flat against the cold stone of the wall to keep myself upright. The Donovans were not rivals. The Donovans were the oldest enemy my family had ever known, the men who had tried, more than once, to wipe my name from the earth entirely. I had spent the bloodiest years of my life holding them back from the door of this very city. Good men had died on both sides of that war. I had made peace with it only because I had won it, and because I had buried that part of my life along with the men it cost me. And now my eldest son, my blood, my heir, was standing in the dark beneath my feet, offering my territory and my name and very likely my life to the one family on this earth I had sworn would never set foot in my city again. I stepped back from the railing. I did not make a sound. I turned, and I climbed slowly back through the sleeping house toward my study. And with every silent step, something inside me that had been dormant for 10 long years began, quietly and terribly, to wake. For 3 days, I let them believe I had heard nothing. It is a particular skill, pretending not to know a thing you know. You must keep your eyes soft and your hands easy. You must pour the coffee with a steady arm while the man across from you discusses, in careful half-sentences, the manner of your death. I had spent 40 years learning that skill, and I had never once needed it more than I needed it at my own breakfast table. Watching my eldest son butter his bread, so I watched, and I listened. And in 3 days I learned the full shape of what Vince had done, and it was worse than a man planning to bury his father. It was a betrayal that reached back into a world I thought I had buried for good. People believe a man like me retires the way other men retire, that you sign a paper and hand over a key and walk into the sun. It is not so. When I left that life, I did not pass my power to anyone. I dismantled it. For 20 years, quietly, patiently, I had been taking the old machine apart, piece by piece, so that no son of mine would ever have to live the way I had lived. The protection arrangements, the men on certain payrolls, the quiet understandings with judges and dock workers and councilmen, I had let them die one by one, on purpose. The way you let a fire burn down to ash so it cannot catch the house. There was almost nothing left. That was the whole point. I wanted to leave my children clean money and a clean name, and nothing of the dark to tempt them. What was left was a name. Mine. And the last few threads of influence too old and too deep to simply cut. The kind of quiet power that does not appear on any ledger, but that men in this city still feared because they remembered who I had been. Those threads were what Vince had sold. He had gone to the Donovans, the family that had wanted my head for 30 years, the family I had fought to a standstill and finally outlived. He had offered them what I had spent 20 years dismantling, the Marchetti name, the last of the old understandings, the keys to doors I had been quietly locking forever. He had offered to deliver it all, gift-wrapped, the moment the old man was declared unfit and the estate fell into his hands. He was not selling a territory. He was selling a ghost, the lingering fear of my name, and he was selling it to the very men who would use it to finish what they had started 3 decades ago. And the price of the deal, the thing that made my blood run cold across that breakfast table, was that the Donovans had a condition. They did not want me unfit. They wanted me gone. A declared incompetent old man can recover, can be examined again, can find a new doctor and a sharp lawyer. A buried one cannot. Vince had not flinched at the condition. My son had agreed to it. There was a moment, sitting there, when the easy answer rose in me like an old hunger. One telephone call. That was all it would take. The threads Vince thought he was selling were not entirely dead. Not yet. Not while I still breathed. There were men in this city who would still answer if I called. Old men who owed older debts. Men who remembered when my word was the only law on certain streets. I could lift the phone, and by morning my son's betrayal, and my son, would be a quiet matter settled in the dark, the way such matters had always been settled. The Donovans would never know. The world would never know. Just one more old man's enemy gone in the night. I held the thought in my hands, the way you hold a stone you are deciding whether to throw. And then I heard Rosa, not the tape. Not yet. I had not found it yet. I heard her the way a man hears the dead, in memory, in the lavender ghost of her in this house. I heard the promise I had made her in a hospital corridor years before she died, when I told her I was done, truly done, that our children would never know the man I had been, that the blood stopped with me. If I made that call, I would be teaching my own son, with my last act, that I had never changed at all. I would be proving him right. The old man would go into the ground, yes, but the old man's world would rise again with him. And one day it would reach for Sophia. No, there would be no telephone call into the dark. But that did not mean there would be no reckoning. It meant only that I would have to do the harder thing. The thing I had never once done in 40 years. I would have to beat my enemies in the light. I would have to take a son who thought he was the most dangerous man at the table and show him, slowly, that he had always been a child playing with his father's tools. I would not use the old power. I would use the only weapons I had left that were still clean. My patience, my mind, and the simple, terrible truth of what they had all done. Let them keep believing the old man's empire was dead. Let them believe he had nothing left but a failing memory and a fortune ready to be taken. That belief was the deepest trap of all, and they were already standing inside it. I finished my coffee. I wished my son a good morning, and I meant the words to sound exactly as empty as they were. He smiled at me, certain of his victory, certain the wounded old wolf had nothing left but teeth too dull to bite. He had forgotten the first thing I ever taught him. A wolf does not need to bite. He only needs to wait until the others believe he cannot. The old wolf was awake, and the game had begun. I went down to the cellar the next morning, when the light was thin and gray, and my children were still asleep in the rooms upstairs. I told myself I was looking for a bottle of the Barolo, the one Rosa and I had saved for an anniversary we never reached. That was a lie. And I knew it was a lie even as I said it to the empty stairs. I was looking for quiet. I was looking for a place in my own house where I did not have to wear the face of a forgetful old man, where I did not have to smile at the wolves who called me Papa. The cellar had not changed in years. Rosa had been the one who kept it, who labeled each shelf in her careful hand, who knew without looking which bottle sat in which corner. After she was gone, 11 months ago now, I had stopped coming down here. The dust had settled over everything like the first snow of a winter no one wanted. I ran my hand along the lowest shelf, the one she always called hers, and that was when I felt it. Behind the empty bottles, pushed back into the dark, was a small metal box, a tin, really. The kind that once held holiday cookies. Its painted flowers faded almost to nothing. I had not seen it in years. It had belonged to her mother, and to her mother before that. And Rosa had kept it the way some women keep a wedding ring, as a thing too small to matter and too precious to lose. My hands were not steady when I lifted it down. I sat on the cold stone floor with the tin in my lap, the way a man sits when his knees no longer trust him. And I worked the lid free. It came open with a small complaint of old metal, and the smell that rose from inside stopped my heart for a moment. Lavender. Faint. Almost gone. But hers. The sachet she used to tuck into drawers, into pockets, into the lining of my coats so that even on the worst nights I carried something of her with me. Inside the tin were two things. The first was her rosary. The wooden beads were worn smooth by 40 years of her fingers. The small crucifix darkened where her thumb had pressed it 10,000 times. I had thought it buried with her. I had stood at her grave and grieved that I had not thought to keep it. And here it was, hidden in her mother's tin, where she must have placed it herself in the weeks before the end. I lifted it out and held it to my face, and for a moment I was not an old man in a cellar. I was a young one, kneeling beside a young woman in a church on the west side, promising God things I had no intention of keeping. The second thing was a cassette tape. It was an ordinary tape, the kind we used to buy by the handful, but across the small white label, in Rosa's handwriting, were 3 words that made my blood run cold. For Salvatore, private. I sat there a long time, just looking at it. Rosa had been gone less than a year. Whatever was on this tape, she had recorded it knowing she was leaving. She had hidden it where only I would think to look, in her mother's tin, on her own shelf, behind the wine we never drank. She had not given it to a lawyer. She had not given it to our children. She had hidden it from them and left it for me, and a cold certainty settled over me that I did not yet understand and did not want to. My wife had been a careful woman. She did not waste words, and she did not keep secrets without reason. In all our years together, she had never once recorded her voice. Why now? Why this why hidden? The questions came faster than I could answer them, and beneath them all ran a current of fear I had not felt since I was a young man with enemies at every door. Because Rosa had died in her sleep. That was what they told me. That was what the doctor wrote. A weak heart, they said, that simply stopped in the night. I had grieved it as a mercy, that she had not suffered, that she had slipped away in peace. But a woman at peace does not hide a tape from her own children. I climbed the stairs slowly, the tin under my arm, the rosary in my pocket, the tape in my closed fist. The house above me was still silent. My children slept on, dreaming whatever wolves dream. I went into my study and shut the door and turned the lock, something I had not done in this house in years. There was an old radio in the corner, a heavy thing from another decade, the only machine in the house that could still play a tape. Rosa used to listen to her programs on it while she cooked. I had kept it for no reason except that throwing it away felt like throwing away the sound of her in the kitchen. I slid the cassette into the slot. My thumb hovered over the button. Some part of me knew, the way an old soldier knows the weather is about to turn, that whatever I was about to hear would change everything, that I could still put the tape back in the tin and bury it on the shelf and live out my days not knowing. But I had never been a man who chose not knowing. I pressed play. For a long moment, there was only the hiss of empty tape, the sound of a room that had been silent for almost a year. And then, soft and certain and unbearably alive, my dead wife began to speak. Salvatore, if you are hearing this, then I am gone, and you have finally found the place I knew you would one day think to look. I am sorry, my love. I am sorry to speak to you from so far away. But there are things I could not say to your face, because I was afraid of what you would do, and afraid of what it would cost your soul. Her voice was thin. The cancer had already been in it when she recorded this. I could hear that now, the way it had hollowed out the music I had loved for 35 years. But it was her. It was unmistakably, achingly her. And I sank back down onto the cold floor and held the rosary against my chest, and let her words fall over me like rain on dry ground. You think I am dying of the cancer, she said, and perhaps I am. But Salvatore, I need you to know the truth about the night of my first attack, the night you were away in the city, when my heart gave out and I could not reach the telephone in time. You have always blamed yourself for not being here. Stop. It was not your fault. my love. It was never your fault. I called our children that night. I want you to understand that. When the pain seized my chest and I knew something was terribly wrong, I called them one by one because they were close and you were not. I called Vince first. He let it ring, and then he sent it away. I called Gianna. She answered, and I told her I could not breathe, and she told me I was being dramatic, that I should lie down and take my medicine and stop frightening everyone. And then she hung up the telephone on me. I stopped breathing myself. The cellar seemed to tilt around me. I sat on the cold stone floor with the tin in my lap, the way a man sits when his knees no longer trust him, and I worked the lid free. It came open with a small complaint of old metal, and the smell that rose from inside stopped my heart for a moment. Lavender, faint, almost gone, but hers. The sachet she used to tuck into drawers, into pockets, into the lining of my coats, so that even on the worst nights I carried something of her with me. I pressed my fist against my mouth to keep from crying out. My wife, my Rosa. Alone on the floor of the kitchen I had given her, calling for her children. And her children had weighed her life against an inheritance and found her wanting. The cancer had not killed her first. They had killed something in her that night that no medicine could ever bring back. And she had carried that knowledge alone to spare me for the rest of her days. I did not tell you, she said, because I knew you, Salvatore. I knew that if you learned what they had done, you would go back to the man you used to be. You would answer it the only way you know how, and you would lose your soul to it. And I could not bear to die knowing I had sent you back into the dark. So I kept it. I hid it here, for the day you would need it. And I prayed you would never need it at all. There was a long pause then. Only the hiss of the tape, and the sound of my own ragged breathing in that stone room. But if you are hearing this, she said at last, then it means I was wrong to hope. It means they have shown you who they are. And so now I must ask you for one last thing, my love. The hardest thing I have ever asked of you. Protect Sophia. The name struck me like a blow. Sophia, my granddaughter, Nico's child, 16 years old, with Rosa's dark eyes and Rosa's stubborn heart. The only one of them who still telephoned me simply to talk. About nothing. About everything. She is the only innocent one left in this family, Rosa said. The only one who still has a chance to grow into something good. Whatever our children have become, Salvatore, that child did not choose it. Do not let mercy blind you to what your sons and daughter are, but do not let your anger blind you to her either. Save her. Be for her the man you became for me. And do not, my love, do not let what they have done turn you back into what you were. Win this without losing yourself. For me. For her. Promise me. The tape hissed on for a few more seconds, and then it clicked, and it stopped. And the silence that rushed in to fill the cellar was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I do not know how long I sat there on the floor. Long enough for the gray light from the window to shift and fade. I held my dead wife's rosary in one hand and the weight of an unbearable truth in the other. And for the first time since the day we buried her, I wept. Not the quiet, uncontrolled grief of a man at a funeral, the deep, breaking sobs of an old man entirely alone, in the dark, with the voice of the only person who had ever truly known him still echoing off the cold stone walls. And when at last the tears stopped, something else took their place, something that did not weep, and did not rage, and did not break. My eyes, when I finally lifted my head, were dry, and they were cold. The grieving husband had finished his grieving. What remained was something my children had never met, and would deeply regret awakening. There are telephone numbers a man never forgets, no matter how many years he spends trying. I climbed out of that cellar with my wife's rosary in my pocket, and her last words burning in my chest. And I went to my study, and I sat at the desk where I had once decided the fates of men. And I dialed a number I had not called in 10 years. A number that belonged to the only man left alive who had stood beside me from the very beginning. It rang 4 times. I had begun to think the number was dead, like so much of my old life, when a voice answered. It was older than I remembered, roughened by time and tobacco, but I would have known it in the dark, in a crowd, at the bottom of the sea. "Salvatore," he said, before I had spoken a single word. "There is only one man who would call me from a number I buried a decade ago. I thought you were dead. Old friend. Or worse. Retired. Tommy Caruso." They had called him the priest, once. Not because he was holy, but because men confessed their sins to him before they died, and because he had a way of making even terrible things sound like they belonged to some larger order. He had been my counselor, my consigliere, the steady hand at my shoulder through wars I no longer let myself remember. When I walked away from that life, Tommy had walked away too, into a quiet retirement of his own. And we had each kept our distance the way 2 men do when their friendship is soaked in too much shared blood. "I need to see you," I said. "Today. Alone." He did not ask why. That was the thing about Tommy. He had never once asked a question he did not need the answer to. He named a place, a small Italian restaurant on the south side that had been there longer than either of us. The kind of place where the tables in the back are understood to be private, and the owner knows better than to remember faces. And 2 hours later, I sat across from him in a booth lined with cracked red leather. 2 old men over 2 cups of black coffee. And I told him everything. I told him about the false diagnosis of my failing mind. I told him about the children descending on my house, the performance of their care, the masks falling at my dinner table. I told him what I had overheard in the cellar, the guardianship, the Donovans, my own son selling my life to my oldest enemy. And then, because he deserved to hear it from me and not from the silence in my face, I told him about the tape. I told him what our children had done to Rosa on the night her heart first failed. Tommy did not interrupt. He listened the way he had always listened, perfectly still, his folded hands resting on the table, his old eyes never leaving my face. And when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and put his hand over mine, and I felt the weight of 50 years in that simple gesture. "I am sorry, Salvatore," he said softly, "about Rosa. She was the best of all of us. She was the only one who ever made me believe a man like me could be forgiven." Then his hand withdrew, and something changed in his face. Something I recognized. Something from the old days. The grief folded itself away, and beneath it was the cold practicality that had kept us both alive across decades. You know what I'm going to say, he said. You called me because some part of you already wants to hear it. I said nothing. I let him say it. The men are still there. Tommy said quietly. You think they forgot you? You think the loyalty you built across 40 years just evaporated because you sold a few restaurants and started going to bed early? There are men in this city who would still walk through fire for the Marchetti name. Your son wants to hand the Donovans the keys to everything you bled for. He wants to put you in the ground to do it. Salvatore, this is not complicated. One word from you, and Vince's problem becomes a closed casket. Quiet. Clean. Deserved. No court, no lawyers, no risk. The old way. The way that always worked. He leaned back, and he watched me, and I understood that he was not tempting me. He was offering me the truth of the world we came from, the only justice that world had ever recognized. And God help me. I felt it pull at me, the same pull I had felt beneath Rosa's oak tree. My son had sold my life. By every law I had ever lived under, his life was forfeit. One word, and it would be done. I turned my coffee cup slowly on its saucer, and I looked at my oldest friend, and I thought of a thin voice on a cassette tape asking me not to lose my soul. And I knew, with a certainty that surprised even me, that I was going to disappoint him. No, I said. Tommy blinked. It was the only sign of his surprise. No, I said again. Not the old way. Tommy, not this time. Rosa asked me for one thing before she died, and I am not going to dishonor her by burying our children in the same ground I promised her I had left behind. There is another way to end this, a harder way, and I am going to need your help to walk it. A weapon does not have to be a gun. This is something the young never understand, and the old learn too late. My son believed power was a thing you held with your hands, a territory you seized, a body you put in the ground. He had learned that lesson from the worst version of me, the version I had spent 10 years trying to bury alongside my wife. But there is a deeper kind of power, and I had spent the last decade of my life learning it in boardrooms and law offices instead of back alleys. It is the power of the patient man who understands the machinery of the legitimate world and knows exactly where to place his hand to make it turn. I leaned across the cracked red leather of that booth, and I told Tommy what I meant to do. I told him I would not raise a hand against my children. Instead, I would let them raise their hands against themselves. They believed I was failing, confused, a toothless old man who could be led quietly toward a courtroom and declared unfit. Very well. I would be exactly that man for them. I would play the part so perfectly that they would lower their guard completely, and in their confidence they would grow careless, and careless men leave trails, documents, recordings, witnesses, confessions disguised as conversation. I would gather every piece of it, patiently, legally, until I held a case so complete that no judge on earth could look away from it. Tommy listened, and slowly, the old cold light in his eyes shifted into something like admiration. You want to bury them in the one ground I never thought to use, he said. Paper, evidence, the law. He shook his head slowly. Salvatore, I have known you 50 years, and you still find ways to surprise me. The Donovans spent a decade trying to kill you with bullets and failed, and you are going to end your own children with a notary and a signature. I am going to give them exactly enough rope, I said, and I am going to let them tie the knots themselves. But I need you to understand the most important thing. Tommy, I said, and I held his gaze so he would know I meant it down to the bone. The men are still out there. I know they are. You told me so yourself, and I felt it the moment I dialed your number. The loyalty I built has not died. There are men in this city who would still answer my call tonight and ask no questions. That is precisely why this matters. I could end this the old way in a single night. The fact that I can, and the fact that I will not, is the only thing that separates me from the men who are trying to destroy me. Rosa knew that. She tried to teach me that for 35 years. I was too slow to learn it while she was alive. I will not be too slow now that she is gone. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once. The way he used to nod when a decision had been made, and there was nothing left but to carry it out. All right, he said. Then we do it your way. The hard way. Tell me what you need. We spoke for 2 hours in that booth. 2 old men plotting in low voices over coffee gone cold. Exactly as we had once plotted other things in other rooms. But this time there was no darkness in it. This time we were building something instead of tearing it down. And I felt, for the first time since the doctor had spoken his careful words, that I was no longer simply a victim waiting for the end. I was a man with a plan, and a friend at my side, and a promise to keep. I would need a lawyer of my own, someone Gianna did not know, someone outside the circles my daughter moved in. I would need a way to record what my children said without their knowledge, in a manner the courts would accept. I would need to learn the exact shape of the guardianship petition they were preparing, so that I could let it advance just far enough to damn them before I shattered it. And above all, I would need to keep Sophia safe and far away from the storm I was about to summon down upon her family. It was nearly dark when we finally rose to leave. Tommy walked me to the door, his hand on my shoulder, and at the threshold, he stopped me. There was something troubling him. I had known him too long not to see it. There is one more thing. Salvatore, he said, his voice dropping low. While you have been busy learning what your children are, I have been making a few quiet calls of my own. Old habits. He hesitated. Your daughter has retained a lawyer, someone to handle the guardianship, to manage the trust once they have control. And that, by itself, is nothing. Of course she would. But I cannot find this person. No firm, no record, no history in any of the circles where a lawyer like that should leave footprints. It is as though this attorney simply appeared, fully formed, exactly when your children needed one. He looked at me, and the old wariness was sharp in his eyes. I do not like things I cannot find. Salvatore. In my experience, a person with no past is either running from something or hiding what they truly are. Watch that lawyer. Whoever your daughter thinks she has hired, I promise you, it is not the whole story. I drove home through the dark city with Tommy's warning sitting beside me like a passenger. A lawyer with no past. At the time, I assumed it was simply another predator, another opportunist circling the wealth of a dying man. I could not have imagined how wrong and how right I was. The hardest part of the plan was not the danger. It was the clock. I had imagined I would have weeks to play the confused old man. Weeks to let my children grow careless and lay themselves bare. I was wrong. On a Tuesday morning, while I was still pretending to forget where I had set my reading glasses, the mail brought a letter that changed everything. The guardianship hearing had been moved. Not weeks away now. 11 days. Gianna had pulled a string somewhere, the way she always did, and the calendar had bent for her. 11 days. And then a judge who had never met me would decide whether I was still a man or merely a problem to be managed. 11 days to gather enough truth to bury 3 people who had spent their whole lives learning how to lie. I did not panic. Panic is for men who have not already decided to win. But I understood, holding that letter in my steady hand, that the slow game was over before it had truly begun. I would have to move now, and move hard. And the first thing I needed was not in my house. It was in a man. So that afternoon, I told my children I wanted to visit my wife's grave. They could hardly object. A grieving, failing old man wishing to sit by his dead wife is the most natural thing in the world. And it gave them an afternoon free of me, which they wanted as badly as I wanted it. Nico offered to drive. I told him gently that I needed to go alone, that there were things a man says to his wife that no child should hear. He looked at me strangely for a moment, my youngest, and then he nodded and let me go. I did not go to the grave. I went to a small social club on the west side, the kind of place with no sign and a long memory, where a man named Tommy Caruso had been waiting for my call for 40 years. Tommy and I had buried friends together, and enemies, and a way of life we both swore we would never miss. He took one look at my face across that dim back room and knew, the way old soldiers know, that something had gone very wrong in the house of Marchetti. I told him everything. Rosa's tape, the children, the Donovans, the hearing in 11 days. He listened without a word, his rosary moving through his fingers, the prayer beads that had earned him his name, the priest, in a life that had little to do with prayer. When I finished, he set the beads down on the table. "Say the word, Sal," he said quietly. "Just the one word. Your children, the Donovans, all of it. By Sunday, it's a closed matter. For Rosa, no," I said. "Not for Rosa. She made me promise. No blood. Not from these hands. Not ever again." He looked at me a long time. "Then what do you need an old killer for?" "I need an old soldier," I said. "I need eyes I can trust. I need someone to keep Sophia safe when the time comes. And I need this." I slid a folded paper across the table, a name and a number Patricia Vance had given me. I need it to be legal. Tommy. Every word. Clean enough to stand in front of a judge. That's how I'm going to do this. Not in the dark. In the light. Where they'll never think to look for me. Something shifted in his old face then. Something between grief and pride. 40 years I've known you, he said. I never once heard you say the word legal. 40 years I never had a granddaughter to leave a clean name to, I said. He gave me what I needed. A small device, no larger than a coin, that would record every word spoken in a room and hold it for days. He showed me how to keep it in the breast pocket of my cardigan, over my heart, where Rosa's lavender sachet had once lived. And he gave me his hand and his word. On Sophia, I drove home as the light failed, an old man with a recorder over his heart and 11 days to win a war. That evening, I began. I sat in my chair and let Gianna talk to me about putting things in order. And I asked the same gentle questions, and I let the small machine drink in every careful, poisoned word. I learned to forget on purpose. I learned to let the thread of a sentence fall and watch the satisfaction settle over my daughter's face when it did. A confused old man is a kind of furniture. You stop noticing him. You say things in front of him you would never say in front of a man who was listening. And I was always listening. But a recording in the dark is worth nothing in the light. And that was the lesson 11 days would not let me forget. So the next morning, Patricia Vance came to the house, in a plain coat with a plain bag, looking like exactly the dull estate lawyer a dying old man might hire. My children saw her and saw nothing. They did not know she had spent 30 years putting clever people in prison, and that the moment she understood what they had done to their own mother, she had agreed to help me end them by the rules. We sat at the kitchen table and spoke the boring language of wills, and underneath it she taught me how to gather what I needed so it would hold. "Make them say it," she murmured. "Not hints. The whole thing, in their own words. A judge can't convict a feeling. That night, alone, I listened back to the day's recording, and buried in an hour of Gianna's honeyed lies, I caught it. A single sentence she had not meant for me to keep. A slip about the other arrangement, the one Vince doesn't know about. My daughter had a secret, even from her brothers. 10 days left. And the first crack in their alliance had just appeared, in my daughter's own voice, on a tape over my heart. 10 days. That was all the time I had to turn one whispered slip into a thing I could hold in my hand. A man can hide a great deal in plain language. I learned that long before my children were born, watching lawyers far cleverer than Gianna bury murder inside the dull gray prose of contracts, knowing no one would ever read past the second page. The trick is not in the lie. The trick is in the boredom. Hide your worst sin in the most tedious paragraph you can write, and honest men will skim right over it, grateful to be done. My daughter had learned that trick too. She had learned it from the same world I had, and now she was using it against her own blood. I waited 2 days before I made my move, because a man in a hurry makes mistakes, and I had learned patience in places Gianna could not imagine. I used those 2 days to be exactly the father she expected, grateful and vague, signing the small, meaningless papers she set before me with a trembling hand, thanking her for taking such good care of her foolish old papa. Each signature made her bolder. Each one made her careless. And carelessness was all I needed. On the third morning, I asked her, in my softest and most confused voice, if she would help me understand all this trust business one more time, because I wanted to be sure my affairs were in order before the hearing. I let my voice shake on the word hearing. I let her see an old man frightened of a court. She could not resist it. She brought the documents to the dining room and spread them across the table, the full family trust, the long pages of it, and she began to walk me through it slowly, as if explaining the rules of a game to a child. She watched my face for confusion, and I gave it to her, frowning in the right places, asking her to repeat the same paragraph twice, but my eyes are old, not blind. And while she talked, I read. It was on the 3rd page, just as the recording had hinted. Buried in a paragraph so dull it was designed to be skipped, written in language that meant nothing to a casual eye, was a second instrument. Not the family trust at all. A separate trust, folded inside the first like a knife inside a loaf of bread. And the sole beneficiary of that second trust, the only name written into its careful, poisonous lines, was Gianna Marchetti. She had built a second door behind the first. When the estate passed to the children, as Vince believed it would, as Nico believed it would, The bulk of it would slip through that hidden second door and into my daughter's hands alone. Her brothers would inherit the appearance of a fortune. Gianna would inherit the fortune itself. She was not only betraying me, she was betraying them. I sat very still and let the truth settle into me, cold and clear. My 3 children were not a pack hunting together. They were 3 predators who would, in the end, turn on one another, and my daughter had simply decided to strike first. Vince thought he was the most dangerous one at the table. He did not know his sister had already written him out of his own crime. I did not let a flicker of it reach my face. I asked Gianna another foolish question. I let her explain the 3rd page to me again, that very paragraph, and I listened to her describe its dull contents in a calm, even voice, telling me it was just standard language. Papa, nothing to worry about. I thanked her. I told her I was so lucky to have a daughter who understood these things, and the recorder over my heart took down every word of her lie. That night, when the house was dark, I called Patricia Vance. Page 3, I told her. There's a second trust folded into the first. Gianna names herself sole beneficiary and cuts the brothers out entirely. She walked me through it today and called it standard language. It's on the recording. There was a silence on the line. The particular silence of a professional who has just been handed a gift. That's not just fraud against you, she said finally. That's fraud against her own siblings. And she put it in writing, and she lied about its contents to your face on tape. Salvatore, that page is going to do half our work for us. We don't even have to break their alliance. No, I said quietly, looking out at the dark city where my son slept. Certain of a victory his sister had already stolen. We don't have to break it. We only have to let them find out about each other. Greed will do the rest. I have watched it my whole life. It is the most reliable force on earth. I could hear Patricia weighing it. You want to use one against the other. I want to do nothing at all. I said, that is the beauty of it. I want to sit very still, keep this page in my pocket, and let my children remember what they truly are. When the time comes, I will not have to accuse them. I will only have to let them look at one another. When I hung up, I sat a long while in Rosa's dark house, the recorder cooling against my heart, the hidden page burning in my mind. I felt no triumph. There is no triumph in learning, with proof that your daughter would rob her own brothers, that the woman who held my arm so tenderly at her mother's grave had spent that same season building a door to lock her family out. 8 days remained. I had the knife now. Not steal. Never steal again. But the truth, which I had learned long ago, can cut far deeper. The trap was no longer a plan. It was a paper in a drawer and a recording over my heart, and 3 children who did not yet know that the most dangerous person at the table had never stopped being their father. In the morning, I would begin to let them feel the first cold draft from the door Gianna had built, and I would watch and wait and say nothing at all. I did not have to lie to my children to destroy them. I only had to tell them the truth in the wrong order. That is a thing few men understand about betrayal. You do not need to invent a poison. You need only to hold up a mirror at the right angle, so that each of them sees, reflected back, the thing they already suspect about the other. Suspicion is a seed that lives in every greedy heart. It does not need to be planted. It only needs a little warmth and a little patience, and the smallest crack of a door left open. 8 days. I had a hidden trust burning in my drawer and a recording over my heart, and I had decided I would not use either of them yet. Steel left in the wound too early only makes a man fight harder. I wanted my children fighting each other, so I began with Vince. He came to my study on a gray afternoon to check on me, which meant to count what he believed was already his. I let him pour himself a drink from Rosa's good bottle. I let him settle into the chair across from me, comfortable, certain, the eldest son surveying his inheritance. And then, in the soft and wandering voice of a confused old man, I said a thing that was not a lie, arranged so that it would do the work of one. "Your sister is so good with the papers," I murmured, looking at the fire and not at him. "So thorough. She had me sign so many things last week. So many pages." I let a small, foolish frown cross my face. I confess I didn't understand all of them, but she said it was all for the three of you. Equal. She was very clear about that. Equal shares. I paused, as if a thought had drifted loose. Strange, though. She made me initial one page twice. The third page, she seemed to want that one most of all. I said nothing more. I asked about his children. I let the conversation move on. But I had seen it land. The small flicker behind Vince's eyes. The first cold draft slipping through the door Gianna had built. He was his father's son in this one terrible way. He could not leave a loose thread alone. The next day it was Gianna's turn. She came with flowers and a casserole in her ledger eyes, and as she arranged the kitchen the way she imagined her mother used to, I let fall, gently, in passing, that Vince had been asking about the trust documents, that he had wanted to know whether everything was truly equal, that he had asked, specifically, about the lawyer's drafts, the ones with the extra pages. I watched my daughter go very still over the sink. He said that, she asked, and the honey had drained from her voice. Vince asked about the drafts. Did I say something wrong? I asked, blinking, helpless. I can never keep it all straight anymore. Sweetheart. Perhaps I'm confused. No, Papa, she said slowly, and I watched the calculations move behind her eyes like fish under ice. No, you're not confused at all. That was the most dangerous thing she said to me in all those weeks, and she did not even know it. I had given each of them exactly one true thing about the other, and let their own guilt supply the rest. Vince now believed Gianna was hiding something in the papers, which was true. Gianna now believed Vince was hunting through the drafts to find it, which was nearly true. Neither of them suspected the frightened old man who had set them at each other's throats with 2 soft sentences and a fire to stare into. Why would they? They had decided long ago that I was no longer a player in the game. They never noticed the hand that moved them. Over the next 2 days, I watched my work bloom. The phone calls between my children grew shorter and sharper. Vince came by twice more and happened to ask, each time, to see the trust documents again. Just to be sure everything's in order. Papa. Gianna began arriving unannounced, watching her brother the way she had once watched me. At one dinner, they spoke to each other in the clipped, careful voices of 2 people circling the same prize, each measuring how much the other knew. Nico sat between them, pale and silent, looking from face to face like a child watching his parents decide to divorce. I felt no joy in it. I want to be honest about that. There is a particular loneliness in winning a war against your own blood, in sitting at the head of a table and watching the children you raised reveal, one careful day at a time, exactly how little they had ever loved you or each other. Rosa had set those places at that table. She had filled those small bodies with food and faith and every good thing she had. And here they sat, grown, circling one another like animals over a carcass that was not yet even cold. 6 days remained. On the 6th night, after the others had gone, I found Nico still in the kitchen, sitting alone in the dark at the table where his mother used to feed him. He did not hear me at first, and in the gray light from the window I saw that my youngest son, the gambler, the weak one, the one I had written off years ago, was crying. Not the performed grief he had shown me when he first came home. Real tears. The kind a man cries when something inside him has finally broken under a weight he can no longer carry. I stood in the doorway and watched him. And something I had buried deep beneath the cold strategy of those weeks stirred in my chest. "Nico," I said softly. He looked up, his face wet, his eyes full of a terror that had nothing to do with money. "Papa," he whispered, "there's something you need to know. Something about Sophia." And the cold game I had been playing so carefully went still in my hands. Of my 3 children, Nico was the one I had given up on first. He was the youngest, the soft one, the boy who flinched at raised voices and lost at cards he should have won because he could never keep the fear off his face. In a family built on the appearance of strength, a son who feels too much is a kind of failure, and I had treated him as one. I had been wrong about many things in my long life. I am not certain I was ever more wrong than I was about Nico. I sat down across from him at Rosa's table, in the gray light, and I did not play the confused old man. There are moments when a mask costs more than the truth, and a weeping sun in the dark is one of them. "Tell me," I said. "About Sophia." It came out of him in pieces, the way the truth comes out of a man who has been holding it until it has nearly drowned him. He told me that the plan had never been only about me, that Gianna and Vince, in their separate and overlapping schemes, had both arrived at the same cold arithmetic. Sophia was 16. Under the trust, if anything happened to me, a portion was set aside for her, held until she came of age. A child's share, protected. And a protected share is an obstacle to people who want everything. They talk about her like she's a line in a ledger. "Papa," Nico said, his voice breaking. "Gianna said the guardianship over you could be extended, that a minor with no fit relatives could be made a ward too, that it would be cleaner if Sophia's share were managed by family, by them." He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. "They want to do to her what they're doing to you. She's a child, and they're already deciding who controls her money." I sat very still. In all those weeks of cold strategy, through every betrayal I had uncovered, I had kept my hands steady and my heart colder. But this reached past all of it, into the one place I had sworn to protect. Rosa's voice on the tape. Protect Sophia. I had thought I understood what she meant. I had not understood the half of it. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked him quietly. "You came home with them. You played the same part. You sat at this table and called me Papa and let them plan my death over your mother's silver. Why now?" He could not meet my eyes. "Because I owe money," he whispered. "A great deal of it, to dangerous people. That's why I came. Vince promised the debt would disappear when the estate cleared. I told myself I was just going along, that I wasn't really part of it, that you'd be looked after." A long, shaking breath. "But Sophia," When they started talking about Sophia, I couldn't, Papa. I held her when she was born. I can't be in a room where they talk about a child like that and say nothing. I can't. Even if it means they kill me for it. I have spent my life learning to tell a real thing from a performed one. It is the skill that kept me breathing for 40 years. And looking at my youngest son in that dark kitchen, I knew, with a certainty I would have staked my life on, that this was real. The weakness I had despised in him my whole life had turned out to be the only conscience left in my house. Listen to me, I said, and listen well, because I am only going to say this once. I told him I knew everything, not all of it, but enough that his eyes widened. I told him I was not the man they believed, that the failing old fool was a thing I had built to draw them out. I did not tell him about Tommy, or the recordings, or the lawyer. A frightened man can be made to talk, and Nico would soon be sitting across from his brother and sister again. But I told him this much, that I had a plan, that it would end without blood, and that Sophia would be safe. I need you to do nothing, I said. That is all. Go back to them. Be exactly the weak, frightened, agreeable Nico they expect. Say nothing different. Do nothing different. If they suspect for one moment that you've spoken to me, they will know the old man is awake, and everything I've built will fall, and Sophia with it. Can you do that? Can you be the coward they think you are? A few days longer, to save her. He looked at me, and something steadied in his wet face, something I had never seen there before. Yes, he said. I can do that. Then you are braver than your brother ever was. I told him. It takes nothing to be cruel. Nico, any fool can be cruel. To be afraid and stay anyway, for someone smaller than you, that is the only courage that has ever mattered. Your mother knew it. I am sorry it took me so long to see that you have it, and they never did. He wept again at that, but differently, and I let him. And for the first time in many cold weeks, I reached across Rose's table and held my son's hand. When he had gone, I sat alone with what he had told me, and the careful machine of my plan turned in the dark and rearranged itself around a single new and burning fact. This was no longer only about justice for Rosa, or about saving an old man from his children. There was a 16-year-old girl asleep across the city who did not know that the people who shared her blood had already begun to count her like coins. 4 days remained, and my plan, which had been a patient and bloodless thing, now had a deadline written in something far more precious than time. I picked up the telephone. I needed Sophia somewhere safe, and I needed it done tonight. I have made many difficult telephone calls in my life. I have called men to send them to their deaths, and called others to tell them their sons were not coming home. But I am not certain my hand has ever rested on a receiver as heavily as it did that night, when I called my granddaughter to frighten her, for her own sake, with the truth. It was past 10 when I dialed. She answered on the second ring, sleepy, surprised. No, is everything okay? It's late. For a moment I could not speak. Her voice was so much like Rosa's at that age. The same warmth, the same quick worry for everyone but herself. 16 years old, asleep in a house that was no longer safe, and she was asking if I was all right. Sophia, I said, keeping my voice slow and steady, the voice I once used to keep frightened men calm. I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to be brave. Can you do that for your old grandfather, There was a pause, and when she spoke again, the sleep had gone out of her. "You're scaring me, nonno." "I know," I said, "and I am sorry. But I would rather frighten you tonight than fail to protect you. Sophia, the next thing I tell you, you must not repeat to anyone. Not your aunt, not your uncles, especially not them." I told her as much as a child should have to carry, and no more. That there was trouble in the family, that her father and her aunt and uncle were not what they pretended to be, that there were things about money and about her grandmother that she was too young to be burdened with in full. I did not tell her the worst of it. I did not tell her that they had begun to speak of her as a number in a ledger. A grandfather is allowed to keep some horrors to himself. "I need you somewhere safe," I said. "Tonight. A friend of mine, a good man, an old friend, is going to come for you within the hour. His name is Tommy. He carried your grandmother's coffin, Sophia. You can trust him with your life, because I am trusting him with the thing I love most in this world, which is you." "Where am I going?" she whispered. "What do I tell my dad?" "You tell him nothing," I said. "You leave a note that says you've gone to stay with a friend for a few days, that you needed space before exams, something ordinary, something a girl your age would do. Pack a small bag, only what you need. And Sophia, if your father asks you anything before Tommy comes, you know nothing. You are tired and you are studying and you are just a girl who wants to be left alone. Can you do that?" A long silence. Then, in a voice far steadier than I deserved from her, "I can do that. Nonno. I trust you." 3 words. I trust you. From the one person in my entire bloodline who still had the right to say them. I had to set the phone against my chest for a moment before I could go on. Tommy came for her within the hour, the way he had come for me my whole life, without questions, without hesitation. I waited by my window in the dark and watched, far down the street, the brief flare of his headlights and then nothing. An hour later, my own phone buzzed once. A single line from Tommy. "She is safe, sleeping. She has her grandmother's eyes." I sat in Rosa's dark house and let myself, for one moment, be only an old man who had just sent his granddaughter into the night to protect her from her own family. I did not feel like a strategist. I did not feel like the man who had once ruled half this city. I felt like what I was, a grandfather, alone, holding a telephone, praying he had been fast enough, because that was the thing that frightened me, even more than the Donovans, even more than the hearing now only 3 days away. I did not know if I had moved in time. Nico had warned me, yes, but Nico had only told me what he had heard. He did not know how far along their plans for Sophia already were. If Gianna had already filed something, already set some quiet legal machinery turning the way she had with me, then a note about exams and a friend's house might not be enough. They might come looking. They might have the law on their side before I had mine. I would have to move faster than I had planned. The careful, patient trap I had been building for a hearing 3 days away might have to be sprung sooner, and to spring it sooner. I needed the one piece I did not yet have, the one ally who could turn my recordings from a private grievance into a public reckoning before a judge. I had heard, in one of Gianna's careless calls, a name that did not fit. A lawyer she trusted, one who had appeared only recently, who said little and watched much. At the time, I had thought nothing of it. Now, sitting in the dark with Sophia gone and 3 days bleeding away, I turned that name over in my mind like a stone I could not quite see the shape of. There was something wrong about that lawyer. Something that did not belong in my daughter's careful, poisonous world. And some old instinct. The one that had kept me alive through 40 years of men who smiled while they planned my death, told me that this stranger was not what she appeared to be. I did not yet know whether she was another enemy, or the ally I had been praying for. In 3 days, one way or another, I was going to find out. The morning after I sent Sophia into the dark, the woman my daughter called her lawyer came to see me alone. I had noticed her once before, at the edge of one of Gianna's meetings, a quiet figure with a leather folder who said almost nothing and watched everything. I had taken her for one more of the expensive people my daughter collected, the kind who charge by the hour to nod at clever crimes. I had been wrong about her, and being wrong about people was not a thing that happened to me often. After 40 years, it is the kind of mistake that usually means a man is already dead. She knocked at the side door, the one Rosa used to use for the grocer, and when I opened it, she did not smile or offer her hand. She simply held up a small leather case, and inside it, where a business card should have been, was a badge. "My name is Diane Keller," she said, "and I am not your daughter's lawyer. I have lived a life in which a knock at the side door rarely brought good news, and my hand was already drifting toward the drawer where an old man keeps the things that have kept him alive." She saw it. She did not flinch. "I'm not here to arrest anyone today, Mr. Marchetti," she said. "I'm here because in 2 days, your children intend to take everything you have, and I would rather they didn't. We want the same thing. I thought it was time we stopped working around each other and started working together." I let her in. I made coffee, because that is what Rosa would have done. And because a man learns more about another person across a kitchen table than across a drawn weapon. She sat where Patricia Vance had sat, and the irony was not lost on me. One quiet woman in a plain coat had come to help me end my daughter by the rules. Another had come to do the same to the men my daughter served. My kitchen had become a strange kind of courthouse. What she told me rearranged the board. The federal people had been watching the Donovan family for more than a year, long before my children ever came home to play at love. They had been building a case the way I had once built things, brick by patient brick. And somewhere in that long watching, a new name had surfaced. My sons. Vince had reached out to the Donovans on his own, offering them the last quiet threads of influence I had spent 20 years cutting away. The Marchetti name and everything the city still feared about it. He was trying to trade a ghost for a seat at a table that had wanted my head for 30 years. He thinks he's buying his way up, Keller said. He doesn't understand that to men like the Donovans, a man who sells out his own father isn't a partner. He's a tool. They'll use him, and when he's used up, they'll bury him slowly, as a message. Whatever you think your son deserves, Mr. Marchetti, it is not what they have planned for him. I said nothing. There is a particular cold a father feels when a stranger explains, gently, the exact manner of his child's coming destruction. Then she told me the rest. The guardianship petition, the doctor, the corrupted records. She knew about most of it, more than I did in some places, and she laid out what she wanted, plainly, the way I respected. My case against the Donovans is almost finished, she said. What I don't have yet is your children on record, in their own words, committing a federal crime I can prove in court. You do, You've been gathering it for weeks. Together, we close both halves of the same trap on the same night, and there it was. The thing I had to be careful of. You want to use my evidence to finish your case, I said. And you want to use my dinner table to do it. I do, she said. There was no shame in her. I liked that. I set down my cup and chose my words the way I once chose men for dangerous work. Then understand me, Agent Keller. I have spent these weeks building my own ending for my children, not yours. I am not handing them to the government and stepping aside to become an old man in the corner of his own war. The trap is mine. The night is mine. The moment my wife's voice fills that room and my children understand what they have done, that belongs to me. You may have everything that happens after, but the reckoning happens on my terms, in my house, by my hand. For a long moment she studied me, weighing it the way a professional weighs a risk that is not entirely hers to take. You stage it, she said at last. We stand in the next room. The instant the crime is on record, we come through the door. Your reckoning, our arrest. One night, two halves. She paused. But understand the cost of 2 days. Mr. Marchetti. The hearing is Thursday. If your son senses the cage before it closes, the Donovans won't wait for a courtroom. You know what they do to men who waste their time. I have known what they do, I said, since before you were born. She finished her coffee then and stood, and for the first time something almost human crossed her face. Your wife, she said. The tape. We'll need it, eventually. I want you to know it won't only put your children away. It's going to help us close a case that protects a great many people who never knew her name. She put on her plain coat. She'd have liked that, I think. From what you've told me, yes, I said quietly. She would have, when she was gone. I sat alone at the table where 2 women in plain coats had now set the 2 halves of the same trap. 2 days. I would have to host the wolves before the hearing could ever happen. I would have to invite them to the table myself, in my own frail and trembling voice, and make them believe they were coming to feast. I picked up the telephone. My hand, for once, did not shake. It was time to set the table. I invited my children to dinner the way a man invites the tide. I called each of them myself, in the small, trembling voice I had perfected over these terrible weeks. The voice of an old man who is frightened and lonely and ready, at last, to put his affairs in order. I told them I wanted us together one last time, all of us, before the hearing, before whatever came next. I told them I was tired of fighting, that I only wanted peace, that I wanted to sign the papers and let them carry the weight I could no longer carry. I said the word peace, and I heard, in the silence on the other end of each line, the sound of wolves smiling. They said yes. Of course they said yes. I was handing them everything they had bled their own mother for. Why would they not come to collect it? The dinner would be on Friday, in the dining room where Rosa had served 40 years of Sunday meals. And I spent the days before it, the way a general spends the hours before a battle he has already decided to win. Patricia Vance came first, in the early afternoon, when the house was empty. She came not as the dull family attorney my children dismissed, but as what she truly was, a woman who had put clever people in prison for 30 years. She brought 2 sets of documents. The first was a false trust, beautiful and convincing. The bait. The papers I would pretend to sign so that my children would say, on record, exactly what they had done to earn them. The second set she locked in my study. The real ones. The ones that would matter when this was over. She walked me through every line of the performance. What I would say. Where I would pause. How to hold the pen as if my hand could barely manage it. And make them explain it to you, she said. Make them tell you, out loud, why the money should be theirs. A man signing under fraud is just a victim. A man signing while they confess the fraud to his face is a trap with a lid on it. She did not smile, but there was steel in her quiet. Get them talking. The law will do the rest. Diane Keller came after dark, through the side door, the grocer's door, with two of her people. They were not loud men. They moved through my house, measuring sightlines and exits, deciding where they would stand and how fast they could cross the room. Keller set a small receiver on the desk in my study and tested the signal from the recorder over my heart, the one Tommy had given me weeks ago, the one that had gathered all of this in the dark. We'll be here, she said, marking the butler's pantry off the dining room, a narrow space behind a single door. Close enough to hear every word, close enough to reach you in seconds. When your wife's voice plays and they react, when one of them says the wrong thing, that's our moment. Don't look at the door. Don't change. Just let it happen. Tommy stood in the corner through all of it, saying little, his old eyes moving between the two women as if he still could not believe the world had come to this. That the great Salvatore Marchetti would end his enemies with a tape recorder and a federal badge instead of the things we had always used. But he had carried Rosa's coffin on his shoulder, and when he looked at me, he nodded. He understood. This was her ending, not ours. And then, on Thursday night, the plan nearly died. Gianna called. Not the honeyed voice this time. A sharper one, a careful one. She wanted to know why Patricia Vance, some little estate lawyer nobody's heard of, had been to the house twice. Her own people had noticed. My daughter, even now, missed nothing. I felt the cold drop through me. The cold of a man who has set a trap and heard, too late, the wire sing. One wrong word and Gianna would smell the cage. She would tell Vince. They would not come, or worse, they would come ready. So I did the only thing 40 years had taught me. I gave her the truth, bent just slightly out of shape. She's drawing up the papers, I said, and I let my voice shake. Let it crack on the next words. The papers to sign everything over. To you. To all of you. I let a long, frightened silence sit between us. I didn't want your brother to know which lawyer, Gianna. I wanted it done before Vince could change the terms. I wanted to be sure your share was protected. Yours. I heard her breathing on the other end. I had given my daughter the one thing she could never resist. The suggestion that she alone was being favored. That her father, even broken, loved her best. Greed is a lock, and vanity is the key that fits every greedy heart. That was smart. Papa, she said at last, and the honey came back into her voice like blood back into a held breath. That was very smart. When she hung up, I set the phone down and found that my hand, the hand that had not shaken in a fight in 50 years, was trembling for real. Friday came. The table was Rosa's silver and Rosa's china, the food she used to make, the flowers she used to cut, all of it staged to make three predators feel at home. Patricia Vance was gone, her false papers waiting in a folder by my place. Keller and her people were silent behind the pantry door. Tommy had taken Sophia somewhere safe and far. I sat at the head of my wife's table, an old man with a recorder over his heart. And I waited. They arrived together, confident, smiling, smelling of expensive things and certain victory. Vince, Gianna, Nico, pale and quiet behind them. They embraced me. They called me Papa. They sat in the chairs their mother had set for them 1,000 times, and when they were settled, when the wine was poured and the trap was warm around them, I reached down beside my plate, and I set the cassette player on the table. I watched the smiles die, one by one, like candles in a cold wind. The room went so quiet, I could hear the candles breathing. 3 of my children sat at the table their mother once polished by hand, and not one of them could look away from the small black machine I had set beside the bread. I let the silence stretch. I had learned, long before any of them were born, that the man who is comfortable in silence owns the room. I pressed a single button, and then Rosa spoke. Her voice filled the space the way warmth fills a cold house, slow and certain. She named the night she fell. She named the calls that went unanswered. She named the long minutes she lay on the kitchen floor while the phone rang in rooms where her own children chose to let it ring. I did not watch the machine. I watched their faces. Gianna's hand drifted to her throat. Vince stared at the tablecloth as if he could burn through it. Only Nico wept, quietly. The way a boy weeps when a weight he has carried too long is finally set down in front of everyone. When the tape ended, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything we had never said. "Papa," Gianna began, and the lawyer's polish had cracked in her voice. "Whatever you think that proves, it proves nothing a court needs," I said quietly. "Your mother's voice is for me. The court will be interested in the last hour." That was when Vince understood, and stood, because he had always believed standing made a man taller. "You senile old fool. You have nothing. A dead woman on a tape and a fortune you can't even remember you own." I looked at my son, and I let him see, for the first time in weeks, the man he thought the doctors had erased. "Sit down, Vincent." I did not raise my voice. I never needed to. And he sat, the way he had sat as a boy, because something in the blood remembers who the wolf is even when the mind has forgotten. "You believed I was finished," I said. "All of you. You looked at me and saw a failing old man with a fortune ready to fall. That is what I wanted you to see. Every confused question, every cup of coffee I forgot, every paper I let your sister explain to me twice. I built that old man for you, the way I once built everything else, and you walked into him without looking up." I turned to Gianna. "You drew up a second trust, in your own name, to cut your brothers out. I read it on the 3rd page, the day you were certain I could not understand it." Her face went white. Vince's head snapped toward her. "And you," I said to my eldest, "sold our name to the Donovans. You agreed to their condition. You agreed to put me in the ground so the deal would hold. You can't prove," Vince started. I have proven it," I said. "Not with the old tools you were all so afraid I might still use. I never made the call you feared. I never lifted a hand. I let you keep believing the old man was empty, and you filled that emptiness, every day, with your own words. You confessed everything to a man you thought could no longer understand you. I touched the small recorder over my heart, where Rosa's lavender used to live. Every word, children, for weeks, spoken freely, to your father's face. For a moment, the old hunger rose in me, the way it always would. There were still men in this city who would answer if I called. By morning, this could have been a quiet matter settled in the dark. My children had earned that ending, and the oldest part of me wanted to give it to them, but Rosa's voice was still in the room. "Protect Sophia," she had said, "not avenge me." And I understood, sitting at her table, that a man who answers betrayal with the old darkness only teaches the next generation that the darkness never died. I would not be that man. Not anymore. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I did nothing with my hands. I nodded toward the pantry door. Diane Keller stepped out, and behind her came quiet men with quiet badges. Gianna understood first, her eyes finding the lawyer she had trusted and discovering a federal agent instead. Vince lunged once, toward the window, toward anything, and a hand settled on his shoulder, and that was the end of it. Nico did not move at all. He only looked at me, and in his face I saw the boy who used to fall asleep on my chest. And I had to look away. They read the charges aloud, the long, cold words the law uses for the things families do to each other when money grows louder than blood. "You could have ended this yourself," Keller said quietly, when they had gone. "We both know it. Why didn't you?" I picked up Rosa's rosary from the table, where I had set it beside the cassette so that some part of her would witness this too. The beads were warm from the candlelight, because she asked me not to. I said, "Vengeance would have buried what was left of them, and the last of me with it. The law can only take their freedom. The other road would have taken their souls. I have spent too long learning the difference to forget it now." She studied me, this stranger who had seen more of my truth than my own children ever had. Then she nodded, once, the way one professional nods to another, and left me alone in the house Rosa built. The candles burned down. The food went cold on plates no one had touched. I had won, if winning is the word. No enemies left, no empire to defend, no children waiting in the dark, and I had never felt so completely empty. But Sophia was safe, somewhere across the city, behind a locked door. My granddaughter slept, not knowing how close the dark had come, and that was the only victory worth having. I closed my hand around Rosa's rosary, and for the first time in years, I prayed. 6 months passed before I could walk into that kitchen again without hearing the phone ring in my memory. The trial moved the way these things move, slowly, with long words and longer silences. I did not go to watch. I had heard everything I needed from a cassette tape, in Rosa's own voice, and there was nothing a courtroom could add to that. The trial gave me one thing I had not expected: the truth about my own mind. The doctor who told me I was failing had not lied. He had been lied to. My children, through a man Gianna paid well, had reached into the clinic's records and planted the false readings that turned a healthy old man into a diagnosis. They needed me sick, because a sick man can be declared unfit, and an unfit man can be stripped of everything by a judge who never meets him. The memory loss they grieved so tenderly at my table was a thing they had built, the way they built everything else. When the federal people pulled the records apart, They found my mind had been clear all along. I had been mourning a death that was never coming, arranged by the very children who held my hand and called me Papa. Vince got the longest sentence. He had sold what was left of the old world to men who would have killed him for the pleasure of it. And the law was kinder to him than the Donovans ever would have been. Gianna got less, but she lost the thing she loved most, the license to practice the cleverness that had ruined her. Nico got the least of all. He had turned, in the end. He had wept in my kitchen and chosen, however late, to stand on the right side of a door. I think his mother would have been proud of that one small thing. I visited Nico once. We did not say much. He asked about Sophia, and I told him she was well, that she was reading again, that she laughed now in the way children laugh when they finally feel safe. He looked at his hands and said, "Tell her I'm sorry." I said I would, and I did. And that was the only forgiveness I had it in me to carry between them. The money was the strange part. There was so much of it, more than one old man could ever spend, more than one family had any right to fight over. For years it had sat behind locked doors and lawyers' words, a thing two of my children very nearly killed for. And in the spring, I gave it away. I called it the Rosa Marchetti Fund. We bought a building on the west side, in a neighborhood where I had once done things I will answer for someday. We filled it with people who help the ones nobody helps, the immigrant women with no protectors, the children who slip through every crack the world leaves open. We put Rosa's name above the door in plain letters. No gold. Nothing she would have called showing off. Just her name, in a place where it would finally mean what it always should have meant. I have done terrible things in my life, and I will not pretend otherwise. But I have learned, late and at a terrible cost, that a man does not choose how he begins. He only chooses how he ends. And I would rather end as the man who built one clean thing than the man who buried his own children in the dark and called it justice. Sophia comes to the fund on Saturdays. She is 16. With her grandmother's eyes and her grandmother's stubborn way of helping people who do not ask for it. She does not know everything. She knows enough. She knows her father did a terrible thing and that I chose the law instead of the river. One afternoon, she asked me if I ever regretted it, if I ever wished I had simply made it all go away. I thought about the phone in my pocket on that last night, about the numbers I did not call. Every day, I told her. And never. Both at once. That's what it means to do the right thing. Little one, it costs you something you can't get back. If it didn't cost you, it wouldn't be the right thing. It would just be the easy thing wearing a better coat. She was quiet for a while. Then she took my hand, the way her grandmother used to, and we watched the people come and go through the door beneath Rosa's name. I am an old man now, and a tired one. The doctor was wrong about my mind, but not wrong that I am closer to the end than the beginning. When my time comes, I will not leave behind an empire. I will not leave behind fear. The men who once trembled at my name have mostly gone into the ground, and the name itself will fade, as all names do. But there will be a building on the west side with my wife's name above the door. There will be a girl who grew up clean, who learned that loyalty to family is not the same as loyalty to what family wants. And there will be a few people in this hard city who slept safer because a tired old sinner decided to spend his last years building instead of breaking. So this is what I have learned. After 68 years, we tell ourselves that family is everything, that blood comes first, that we must protect our own no matter the cost. But blood is not the same as love, and protecting your own is not the same as protecting what is right. Sometimes the people who share your name are the very ones you must stand against. And the hardest courage in this world is not the courage to fight your enemies. It is the courage to do what is right, even when the wrong is wearing your own children's faces. I keep Rosa's rosary in my pocket still. Some nights I take it out and tell her, quietly, that I kept my promise, that Sophia is safe, that I chose the harder road, the way she asked. And in the silence that follows, I have learned to believe that she hears me.